Dispatchers. What non-emergency calls have you received that actually were an emergency? I've handled lots of real emergencies on the non-emergency line. The one I'll never forget is when a woman called us to collect the body after she shot her husband. What always surprised me was during busy times. I'd ask callers, is this an emergency or can you hold? People would say they could hold, but then describe serious emergencies. I'd think, no, your stab wound can't wait. I noticed that shocked people often fixate on one small detail and forget to mention the really important stuff. Story 2. I used to work for the non-emergency medical line in the UK. One time I got a call from someone caring for an elderly lady. This lady was in a wheelchair and couldn't really move. At the start of these calls, I always ask, can I speak to the patient? It's usually a quick yes or no answer, but this time the carer went, for what felt like forever. Finally, they said no, I couldn't talk to the patient. Why not? Well, turns out the patient couldn't breathe and was turning blue. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, thinking it was a non-emergency call when it was actually a life-threatening situation right under my nose. Story 3. I'm not a dispatcher, but I once got a call about a noise problem at a farm near the edge of town. It seemed simple at first, but boy was I wrong. What really happened was wild. A party full of teenagers got taken over by some guy high on drugs. He broke into the house and suddenly we had a hostage situation on our hands. This mess lasted for 3 whole hours. I was on edge the entire time, wondering how it would end. Luckily, the guy's high wore off eventually. He crashed hard, and when it was all over, nobody got hurt. Talk about a close call. Story 4. I got this call from a guy who said he was driving to the ER. He asked if we could have a wheelchair ready because he thought he'd pass out as soon as he arrived. Sounded odd, but I've heard weirder requests. Then I found out what really happened. This dude had cut his hand clean off. Yeah, you heard that right. His whole damn hand. And get this, he was driving to the ER one-handed, bleeding all over the place. Can you imagine the mess in that car? But wait, it gets even crazier. This guy had the presence of mind to pick up his severed hand and shove it in his jacket pocket, like it was his wallet or something. I mean, talk about understatement. Here I am thinking he might need a wheelchair, and he's literally holding his own hand in his pocket. That's one call I'll never forget, I tell you. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 5. My friend and I were walking my dog past the local elementary school during winter break. We heard what sounded like a fire alarm and smelled a bit of smoke. At first, we thought we were just imagining things. I mean, nobody else seemed worried, right? An hour later, we walked by again. The alarm was still going and that smoke smell was still there. We decided to call the non-emergency line. Why? Well, we didn't want to look like dumb teenagers pulling a prank. When the operator answered, I explained what was going on. Her response? Wait, you're telling me you think an elementary school has been on fire for the past hour and you didn't consider that an emergency? Yeah, not my smartest moment. Turns out there really was a fire. It was small and didn't do much damage, but still. I've never even told my mum that I'm one of the unnamed sources who alerted the authorities about a fire at the local school. It's a secret my dog and I will take to our graves. Well, I guess not anymore, but you get the idea. Story 6. I remember this story one of my instructors told us during training. It stuck with me, even though it's not exactly what you asked for. So, this instructor and his team got a call about someone with chest pain. Now, when you hear chest pain, you automatically think heart attack, right? That's what they thought too. They rushed to the scene, all geared up to handle a cardiac emergency. But when they got there, oh boy, were they in for a surprise. Turns out the patient's chest pain wasn't from a heart attack at all. No, the guy had a freaking gunshot wound in his chest. Can you believe it? Here they were, ready for heart problems, and they walk into a scene straight out of a crime show. I mean, chest pain is chest pain, I guess. It's still an emergency either way. But talk about expecting one thing and getting something completely different. That story taught me to always be prepared for the unexpected in this job. You never know what you're really walking into. Story 7. I work in emergency road service. One day I got this crazy call. It was a lockout, but not your usual kind. This disabled woman was locked inside her car. Yeah, you heard that right. Inside, not outside. Her car's electrical system had gone haywire. See, she had this special electronic thing to help her get in and out of the car. But with the car dead, that thing wasn't working, so there she was, stuck like a bug in a jar. It was snowing like crazy outside. I'm talking serious winter weather. And it was freezing, only 20 degrees out. I checked and the non-emergency response time was 4 hours. 4 hours in that weather. I told her straight up to call 911. I mean, come on, this was serious. But she flat out refused. Wouldn't do it no matter what I said. I couldn't believe it. Here she was, trapped in a frozen car, and she wouldn't call for help. Story 8. It's usually the older folks who really get me. They call in with these wild situations, but act like it's no big deal. I once had this old-timer call and say, it's not an emergency, but I fell 10 hours ago and just now crawled to the phone. Just need some help getting up. Oh, and please don't have them use lights and sirens. Don't want to wake the neighbours. Another time, someone called in all casual like, oh, I'm just having chest pain and can't really breathe right. Just want someone to come check me out. Like it was a stubbed toe or something. Or, how about this gem? My husband hasn't pooped in a while and now he's having really bad stomach pains. Yeah, because that's totally normal, right? These folks, I swear, they downplay stuff that could go south real fast. I think they're embarrassed or don't want to be a bother. Story 9. I've been in the dispatch game for almost a decade now. Let me tell you, it's a wild ride. You'd think all the real emergencies would come through the emergency line, right? Nope. It's more like a coin toss. Half the time, the serious stuff comes in on our regular old admin lines. Shock does crazy things to people's brains. Sometimes folks call in with emergencies that wouldn't faze most people. But hey, when you're panicking, everything feels like the end of the world. I've had some intense calls come in on our non-emergency lines. We're talking heavy stuff. Suicide attempts with guns, cars flipped over, houses on fire. Real life or death situations. Then I'll pick up an emergency call and what do I get? My neighbour's dogs won't shut up. I kid you not. Story 10. I used to work for a line which was supposed to be for non-emergencies. But let me tell you, that line was anything but non-emergency most of the time. One call I'll never forget. This guy rings up saying his wife just fell asleep. Yeah, right. Turns out she was dead. Then there was this mom who called about her 18-month-old who wouldn't wake up. Why? Oh, she'd only dropped the poor kid down a flight of stairs 7 hours ago. Another time, a woman called worried about her son's mental health. I ring the number she gave me and all I hear is, he's got a knife, please my baby. Then the line goes dead. Talk about heart stopping. Oh, and get this. Some guy calls from a payphone saying his friend overdosed, started foaming at the mouth and went a funny colour. So what does this genius do? He runs away and waits 15 minutes before calling us. We got everything. Strokes, heart attacks, kids drinking bleach, you name it. We heard it. The whole time I'm calmly asking questions while my brain is screaming, why the fuck are you calling us? Story 11. I'm not a dispatcher, but I've got a story from the other side of the line that's pretty wild. It was summer, and I was at the beach when I spotted what I thought was a lost dog. Being a good citizen, I called it in. The dispatcher started asking me all these questions. Did it have a collar? What breed was it? As we talked, something started to click. Turns out my lost dog wasn't a dog at all. It was a freaking coyote. But wait, it gets better. When animal control and the cops showed up, they dropped another bomb on me. This coyote? Yeah, it had rabies. Thank God it was early and nobody was at the beach yet. Can you imagine a rabid coyote running around a crowded beach? That could have been a disaster. Story 12. I'm a paramedic, not a dispatcher, but I've got a story that still bugs me to this day. We got a call about a fall. Dispatch said the patient just needed help getting up. They told us she was breathing, awake, and acting normal. No big deal, right? We didn't use lights or sirens. It was close by, light traffic. Why rush? Boy, were we in for a shock when we got there. This wasn't just a fall. The patient was having a full-blown stroke. She wasn't responding and she was struggling to breathe. There was a hole in the wall right by her head. We think she hit it when she fell. Turns out she had a hemorrhagic stroke. That's the bad kind, where there's bleeding in the brain. We took her to hospice a few days later. Looking back, there wasn't much we or the hospital could have done differently. The family followed her wishes and asked for comfort care only. Story 13. So I'm working the non-emergency line when I get this call from a mom. She tells me her daughter, who's home alone, just called her in a panic. The kid said someone kicked in their front door and was roaming through the house. Meanwhile, she's hiding under her bed, terrified. Now, this is definitely not a non-emergency situation. But for some reason, this mum decided our line was the way to go. Go figure. I don't mess around. I dispatch all my units right away. They get there in about 2 minutes, ready for anything. And what do they find? The landlord? Yep, you heard that right. Turns out the landlord had given 24-hour notice that he was coming to fix a light. Guess the daughter didn't get the memo. So this home invasion was just a routine maintenance call. Talk about a false alarm. Looking back, that mom should have called 911, no question. When you think your kid's in danger, that's not the time to worry about being polite. But hey, at least everyone was safe in the end. Story 14. So there I was minding my own business when some guy tries to climb through my bedroom window. Talk about a rude awakening. Now, I had this old, crappy bed that was always falling apart. For once, that turned out to be a good thing. I yanked off one of the legs and used it to scare off the would-be intruder. He took off pretty quick after that. Since the guy was gone, I figured I'd be a good citizen and call the non-emergency number. You know, not make a big deal out of it. Boy, was I wrong about that. Before I could even finish explaining, there's a freaking helicopter overhead and cop cars at my door. We're talking less than a minute here. It was like a scene from an action movie. The dispatcher, bless their heart, was real patient with me. They just said, next time you can just call 911. Yeah, no kidding. There I was, trying not to be dramatic, and I ended up with half the police force at my house. Story 15. I got this call from a family about their elderly grandma. They said she'd hurt her leg, but they were pretty vague on the details. When we got there, holy shit. This poor old lady's thigh bone, her femur, was broken and sticking right out of her skin. I mean, how do you not notice something like that? The kicker? They called the non-emergency line. Can you believe it? A bone sticking out of the skin, and they're acting like it's no big deal. Well, turns out there was more to the story. This whole mess led to charges for elder abuse and neglect. I'm guessing that's why they tried to play it cool with a non-emergency call. Looking back, it makes my blood boil. These people were trying to cover their asses while grandma's sitting there with a bone poking out. Story 16. I work for the fire service, and let me tell you, we get a lot of not an emergency emergencies. It's wild. This one time, a guy calls in saying, I don't want to be a bother, but I've been on the floor for 4 days, haven't eaten or drunk anything. Nobody has a key but me, just need a bit of help up. Turns out, he'd crawled to the phone and kicked a table down to reach it. Poor guy was so dehydrated, he spent a week in intensive care. Then there was this old lady who called, cool as a cucumber, saying, I have a small fire in my kitchen. We sent a couple engines thinking it's no big deal. We get there and the whole damn building is up in flames. CCTV showed the place was already an inferno when she called. She was just super chill about the whole thing. Story 17. So there was this day when a tornado hit a nearby town. Their lines were swamped, so I got the overflow calls. Let me tell you, it was intense. I'm taking dozens of calls from a city I barely know, with people screaming about being buried in rubble or not being able to find their kids. This one guy calls and says his neighbours are gone. Not just injured or hiding, gone. Their whole manufactured home had vanished like it never existed. Found out later that couple died. It was a rough day, to say the least. Now, for something a bit lighter, we had this minor earthquake once, about 5.2 on the Richter scale. It hit just after 4:30 in the morning. My 911 line lights up like a Christmas tree, and I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. But no, most calls went like this. Me, 911, what's your emergency? Caller, did we just have an earthquake? Me, yes. What's your emergency? I'm thinking collapsed walls, injuries, gas leaks, you name it. Caller, oh, I don't have an emergency. Just wondered if it was an earthquake. My favourite was this lady who called 5 minutes after it happened and asks, oh, what was it on the Richter scale? I was frustrated and snarked back, I don't know, Mum. Our seismometer is broken. She just goes, oh, bless her heart, she didn't even catch the sarcasm. I swear, some days in this job, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. Please like and subscribe if you would like more of this content in the future. Now it's time for Today I Effed Up stories. Story 1. Today I effed up by creating the most terrifying and embarrassing moment in my life. It is currently 1 a.m. This happened about 20 minutes ago. I'm currently bawling my eyes out from humiliation and shock. It all started when I, 23F, got home late from work. We had a meeting after the park was closed and I didn't get home until 10 p.m. I took a shower and smoked my dab pen while drying my hair. I then proceeded to forget the next hour. My hair was dry and I was playing Red Dead Online. I just got comfy when I heard my cat Winnie make a strange meow. My cat only meows like this when she sees something outside. It's like a low yowl and not a cute meow. I paused the game and took my headphones off. She was meowing in the living room. She ran into the doorway to my bedroom and meowed again. I followed her out into my living room, which was only lit by a nightlight. I saw that my motion-activated light was on outside. Winnie was looking through the blinds and meowed again and again. The light went off and then came back on. I called my roommate, 26M. He was at work and getting off in an hour. I was fried at this point and I was thinking that I was overreacting. Winnie meowed louder and longer, over and over. I was freaking out and a shadow from my patio moved. A few seconds later, there was a knock on the door. I felt my heart in my ears. The heartbeats were really loud and everything was in slow motion. I stared at the door for what seemed like about 30 seconds, but was probably only 2 or 3. I darted to my room, locked my door, and then was in my closet with a large knife. I don't remember if I got the knife before or after the knocking. I was on the phone to police. My breath was incredibly shaky and raspy. I was having memories and images of my family and friends rushing through my head. Then I thought of my parents and how I needed to call them, but I was on the phone with 911 telling them info and location. I was mentally preparing to kill someone or die. The 911 dispatcher was silent. She said there were 2 officers close. Silence. I asked where they were. She told me they were turning into my apartment. I waited the most painful 30 seconds of my life. It seriously felt like 10 minutes. I heard voices at my front door. I heard the dispatcher's voice. She asked, "Did you order delivery?" Story 2. Today I effed up by checking a mousetrap immediately after hearing it snap. Alright, short story. We've had a mouse problem and I have several mousetraps put out. I've always been told that snap traps, the quintessential mousetrap that snaps a bar down on a mouse, is the most humane way to quickly dispatch a pesky mouse. This is not true. I was standing in the bathroom in my robe, brushing my teeth, when suddenly, snap! Got one! My wife and I said in harmony. I went to check on my trophy kill only to find a mouse, half alive, staring and panting at me. He looked so scared and immediately my heart sank and I wanted to cry. I immediately felt guilty and wished I could unsnap the trap. I am a firefighter and a paramedic and have seen countless horrible things. I have caught mice in snap traps before, but seeing this poor bugger suffering made me sick. I thought of the best way to finish the job, and first I thought about blasting it with a shotgun, but I didn't know the best way to do that at night. I eventually settled on beating it to death with a transfer shovel in my driveway while in my robe and underwear, while apologizing profusely. Now I am sad. Story 3. Today I effed up by killing someone. I'm a dispatcher for my town's police and fire departments, and last night I worked an overtime shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I usually work the swing shift, so by 5:30 a.m. I was exhausted. I was handling police dispatch, and unusually our department has PD dispatchers answer 911 calls in addition to the regular call takers. Most departments don't do this, and now I understand why. At 5:30 a.m., while I was working a burglary in progress on the radio, I absent-mindedly picked up a 911 call. I've always loved answering the phones, especially 911 lines. Well, I used to, anyway. To cut to the chase, I mistyped the address while trying to respond to my officers on the radio. The call was about a 48-year-old male experiencing chest pain, conscious and breathing at the time. The addresses 4,600 and 6,400 on this street aren't too far apart, but they're separated by a river. This meant the fire crews had to go all the way south to the nearest bridge, cross to the east, then head back north to reach the correct street and address. The delay was 14 minutes, 14 excruciating, terrible minutes. After I called them back with the correct address, they phoned again a minute later to say the man was no longer conscious, and then he died. I'm struggling to process my feelings right now, and I'm not even sure if how I feel matters. The family just lost a loved one because of my human error, my stupid, careless mistake on the most fundamental aspect of my job. Get the fucking addresses right. So yeah, that's how I royally screwed up. I'm about to go get completely wasted now. Story 4. Today I effed up by successfully breaking my friend out of jail. This is a tale of a jailbreak that actually worked for a minute. It happened years ago, and while I'll use fake names and omit specifics, this remains the most epic screw-up I've ever been involved in. I was in the military, stationed stateside, hanging out with a group of buddies. That night, we discovered Jaeger bomb shots, downing round after round. Time flew by, and at 2 a.m, my friend Brian decided to drive my roommate and me home to our off-base apartment. We were quickly pulled over. 3 21-year-olds leaving a bar near a military base at 2 a.m. is apparently suspicious. The officer knew we were all drunk, and we admitted it. Brian failed the breathalyzer and was handcuffed in the police car. The officer then offered my roommate and me breath tests to see if we could drive Brian's car home to avoid impound charges. We failed too. Oddly, the officer left us with Brian's car and keys before driving off with Brian to the local jail. About 20 minutes had passed since we were pulled over. My roommate and I then had an oh-so-bright idea. PSA. This happened years ago when DUIs weren't taken as seriously as they are today. We were young and stupid. I don't condone driving under the influence. I'm extremely grateful we didn't hurt anyone that night. Our terrible judgment led us to drive Brian's car back to our apartment. As military police officers ourselves, we felt guilty about letting our friend get in trouble. On the way home, we hatched a ridiculous plan to get Brian out of jail. The plan involved getting Brian's car home, freshening up, putting on our military police uniforms, calling my precinct to prevent them from checking the jail Brian was in, then calling the jail ourselves, pretending to be our command. We then drove to the jail around 4 a.m. Remarkably, our plan worked initially. We were buzzed into the jail, and after a nerve-wracking wait, Brian was brought out in handcuffs. His face went ghost white when he saw us. We swapped our handcuffs for the jails and walked out with Brian in custody. As we crossed the parking lot, my roommate whispered, "Don't get in the car." The arresting officer had arrived while we were inside and recognized us as Brian's passengers from earlier. Our hearts stopped as he confronted us. Needless to say, we all ended up in jail. Our command retrieved us at 8 a.m. and I faced severe punishment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I was confined to base for 45 days and deployed soon after. Despite the shame and disappointment, we became infamous at our command for our loyalty. Somehow, this incident boosted camaraderie, though the military absolutely didn't condone our actions. I'm grateful this didn't ruin my military career and I was still honorably discharged. It remains the biggest screw-up of my life, but it's now a crazy story from my youth in the military, a testament to misguided loyalty and the bonds formed in service. Story 5. Today I effed up by calling the police after I dropped my phone and my arm got stuck behind the couch. This story starts as all tragedies do, with a heartbreaking moment. I was playing a game on my phone and accidentally dropped it behind the couch. Very frustrating, but not a big deal, I thought. I'll just grab it from behind the couch, right? Oh no, I was so wrong. I reached behind the couch and being pretty short, I was sort of just swinging my arm around hoping to make contact with my phone. Suddenly my arm caught on the back frame of the couch between the couch and the wall. Specifically, the side button on my Apple Watch got stuck. For those that don't know, the Apple Watch has an emergency SOS function. If you hold down the side button for a few seconds, it brings up the emergency screen. Then it starts a 5-second countdown before calling 911. It makes a siren noise and starts vibrating pretty aggressively, then announces that it is calling 911. I heard the siren but didn't register what was happening until I heard the announcement. I was suddenly hit with a rush of adrenaline and yanked my arm out of the couch frame trap. However, it was too late. The dispatcher was on and I'm screaming at both her and the watch that, "I'm okay, please don't worry, I am okay." No, I don't need help or an officer, I'm really fine. However, I was informed that an officer had to come out and check just to be sure. There are about 15 cops who live in my neighbourhood. So the officer who showed up was actually one of my neighbours who I had seen in passing. I opened the door, very red and pretty out of breath. He said, "Ma'am, are you okay? We received an emergency call from this location." And I had to bow my head and explain to him that yes, I was fine. I just got my arm stuck behind the couch and the Apple Watch called 911 for me. At first he just stared and he was kind of confused, but then his lips twitched and I saw that he was doing his best not to laugh. He explained that people accidentally call in 911 on their Apple Watches is pretty common, but he'd never directly experienced it, and that this was one of the funniest moments of his career. Fortunately, he is a very nice guy, but now every time I see him around the neighbourhood, he says, "Hey, Apple Watch." Story 6. Today, I effed up by opening a suitcase I found next to a dumpster. I was living in an old apartment building in Las Vegas, across the street from McCarran Airport. Despite the location, the small complex was surrounded by one-way and dead-end streets, making them surprisingly quiet, especially at night. During my late-night walks with our dog Daisy, it wasn't uncommon for me to witness strangers dumping garbage in our dumpsters. The unlocked and easily accessible dumpsters in our parking lots became destinations for discarded furniture, appliances, car parts, and yard waste. The area's fixed and low-income status made evictions common, causing the dumpsters to overflow at times with personal belongings like children's toys, pantry items, or garbage bags full of clothes. One morning, while taking out our trash, I spotted a green suitcase sitting on the ground about 5 feet in front of the dumpster. Unlike other discarded luggage, this one was zipped up. Initially, I ignored it, but after tossing my garbage bag and walking past it a second time, curiosity got the better of me. I knelt beside the partially unzipped suitcase, feeling drawn to it. Without hesitation, I pulled the zipper open, sensing it was filled with something. As I flipped the lid open, I paused, struggling to register what lay before me. When realization dawned, I immediately regretted my actions. Stuffed neatly into the suitcase was the body of a dog, a terrier mix. Its grey and white blood-stained fur surrounded open wounds, and its open eyes seemed to have witnessed its final moments. I couldn't tell if it had been beaten to death or hit by a car, but it wore no collar. As flies began to swarm, my stomach turned. The situation was perplexing. The dog fit almost too perfectly into the suitcase, raising numerous questions. Was it a hit-and-run victim moved to the dumpster? Did the person responsible already have a suitcase in their car? Was it a casualty of dog fighting? Shocked and confused, I knew one thing for certain. This dog deserved better than being compacted in a garbage truck. It needed a proper, respectful disposal. I called Las Vegas Animal Control, reported my find, and they sent a truck to recover the animal. Filled with remorse, I decided to try tracking down the dog's owners. I joined every local Facebook Lost and found Pet Group, hoping to find a matching description, but my search yielded no results. After days of fruitless efforts and unanswered ads, I reluctantly gave up. A year later, I still think of that dog and wonder if somewhere, someone misses their lost companion. Story 7. Today I effed up by shouting the N-word at the top of my lungs. I live in a predominantly black apartment complex and am a blonde-haired, white-skinned countryman born and raised. I'm certainly not racist, but after today, I'll never be able to convince my neighbours of it. I work for a company that captions phone calls for the deaf and hard of hearing. Our main clientele are elderly people who have lost their hearing. The government provides them with a special phone with a screen that displays text. Whenever they make or receive a call, an agent like myself is automatically connected to it. We listen to the person speaking to our client and caption everything they say. The caveat is that we do this by verbally repeating every word out loud. Our voice is then turned into text which appears on the client's phone. We are trained to speak in a very specific manner that delivers accurate and easy text. There's a clear rule at this job that you have to caption everything word for word, regardless of content. 2 years ago, I did this job in an office with hundreds of cubicles. Everyone knew the job, and it was common to hear someone in the next cube having to caption all sorts of calls. The same is not true when my neighbours hear it through my thin apartment walls. Unfortunately for me, a new resident was parking the world's loudest U-Haul truck. Making such a racket, I had to yell at the top of my lungs to get my computer to process my captions over the noise. Even more unfortunately, I was on a call captioning some of the most foul racist drivel I've ever heard in my life. So for the sake of my job and the excellent level of service I'm obligated to give my clients, I shouted those obscenities with violent effort. I really like my neighbours. It's taken a lot to be accepted by them. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If racists had a look, I probably fall really close in line with the stereotype. Buzzed head, big beard, pale skin, piercings and tattoos all over. That's just the way I look. And it means I have to smile and put in a lot of effort for people to see past that. I was doing a great job until today, but after I got off work and took my dog for a walk around the complex, my neighbours looked at me in a very different way. I very much doubt I'll be invited to the next BBQ, which honestly is the worst because I've been working on a new pulled pork recipe all month to show everyone. Story 8. Today I effed up by stabbing myself in the arse. It had been a seemingly uneventful snow day. My sister and I, obsessed with the Great British Baking Show lately, passed the storm by attempting to make a Swiss roll. After a family dinner, we were cleaning up and putting dishes away in the open dishwasher. I wanted to present the cake with a little powdered sugar on top to jazz it up, a decision that would come back to stab me in the arse. This prompted me to get the sifter, conveniently located directly to the right of the open dishwasher. Within this dishwasher, closest to the sifter-containing cabinet, was the separate compartment for dirty cutlery, all standing to attention. As I bent down to retrieve the tool, my unsuspecting butt felt 4 identical pricks as the tines of an offending dinner fork poked through my pants and sank about 1/4 inch into my lower left cheek. At first, I was more in shock than anything, and was probably a pretty comical sight as I jumped up with the fork still attached to my rear. Initially, it hurt, but it was bearable. My mum freaked out and I literally had to calm her down. I asked her to pull it out, which is when I realised, painfully, that it was in pretty deep. Soon enough, the rest of my family saw that the situation was serious, albeit hilarious, and they jumped into action. My mum called my neighbour, a chiropractor, and my sister called 911. My dad, however, tried to dominate the situation by incessantly demanding we trust his Boy Scout knowledge of puncture wounds and just yank it out and apply pressure. His aggressive input was unnecessary and quite unhelpful in the already tense environment. In fact, it literally caused the dispatcher to think that a stabbing had actually occurred because of the yelling, so they sent about 5 squad cars along with the ambulance. They arrived within 1 or 2 minutes. It was almost spooky how quick it was. I was okay by the time the EMTs arrived, a little shaken up by my dad's behaviour. I had cried a bit, but they wrapped it up and had a laugh doing it. It was a good reminder of how ridiculous the whole thing was. I was smiling by the time I got to the emergency room, where I was quite obviously the entertainment on a slow night. Basically, every nurse tried to act like they were involved so they could see the girl with a fork in her ass. It was great fun. They didn't really make a production out of it. They just stuck me with some numbing shots and yanked it out, having to cut a favourite pair of pants in the process. No stitches were necessary. And apparently, according to the EMTs, we had done the right thing not following my dad's advice and just pulling it out then and there. We tried the Swiss roll when we got home. It was amazing. Story 9. Today I effed up by sticking my finger in a hole it doesn't belong in. This happened when I was around 6 years old at a bank with my mum. She was sorting something out at the counter, and at this bank, in addition to the screens, they had a small area to pass things between with a see-through cover and many holes. I discovered that I could easily fit all but my index finger in these holes. For whatever reason, I decided to test whether these holes were all the same size by attempting to stick my index finger in each one, ignoring my mother, who told me not to do that as it would get trapped. The first row of holes were as expected. My finger wouldn't go in past the joint. So I moved on to the next row, and about halfway through, I finally succeeded and got my finger in one. When I tried to remove it to test the next hole, I discovered, to my horror, that my finger wouldn't budge. My mother, noticing my finger in the forbidden holes, told me to stop again or there'd be trouble and turned back to the bank teller. It took a while before my mum noticed my finger was still in the hole. She yelled at me to remove it, and I explained I couldn't. She tried forcefully to remove it, only to realise it was now stuck firm and slightly swollen. After a verbal scolding that can be summarised as, "I told you that would happen, you idiot," the bank teller grabbed a bottle of washing up liquid from the kitchen and attempted to lubricate my finger enough for it to escape. Even after dousing my finger and most of the cover, it remained stubbornly in place. At this point, the bank manager decided she needed reinforcements and called the fire brigade. They expected they'd just send one of the cars, but no. We got the full engine and 6 burly firemen turning up with lights and sirens, followed by an ambulance dispatched because I was a kid. The firemen tried various methods to free my finger, including yanking and spraying their own special lubricant. When these failed, they resorted to using a small saw-like tool to cut through the holes around my finger. They then moved me to a table, gently cut into the plastic on either side of my finger, and snapped the remaining bit, finally freeing my digit. The paramedics gave my finger a look over, and I was free to go home with my fairly bemused mother and my dad, who found the whole thing hilarious. Story 10. Today I effed up by not washing new underwear before wearing them. Yesterday I was getting ready for work and put on some brand new underwear straight out of the package. Usually I wash them first, fearing that some weird detergent might harm my private parts or make my butt itchy. But I was in a hurry, so I just grabbed a pair and headed to work. I drink a lot of water during the day, so I usually have a couple of good whizzes in me. At work, I wear khaki-coloured pants, so I always grab a paper towel on the way to the bathroom to wipe off any dribble. I had to pee pretty badly, so I hurried in, grabbed my paper, went to the urinal, unzipped and flipped, expecting the usual quick relief. Instead, I felt no relief at all. What I did feel was my hands, arms, and the front of my clothes getting sprayed. Looking down, I discovered a little round sticker covering 99% of my urethra. The other 1% of uncovered opening was wildly and painfully spraying pee all over me. I pinched off, which hurt, peeled off the sticker, which also hurt, and finished my business. The whole experience was so uncomfortable and embarrassing that I ended up going home an hour early. There was no way I was going to sit around in my pee-soaked pants for the rest of the day. This incident taught me a valuable lesson about always washing new underwear before wearing them, no matter how rushed I might be. It's certainly not an experience I ever want to repeat. Story 11. Today I effed up by being that scary dude on a dark country lane you see in movies, brandishing a tire iron. I was working the late shift on an IT help desk at a UK hospital in January. After getting off at 10 p.m. and having a smoke, I left the hospital around 20 past. I had two choices for my route home. The motorway, which was about 2 miles longer but took roughly the same time as the back roads. Since it was dry, I decided to take the back roads. My little hatchback preferred them anyway, and its decent full beams could light up the lanes well enough. About 5 miles into the countryside, there was a sweeping right-hand bend. I was driving at a reasonable speed, considering it was a wide open road with no other cars around. Suddenly, I saw the eyes of some animal light up in my full beams ahead. I eased off the throttle. As I got closer, I could see it was a lovely black and white striped badger. This badger, however, couldn't decide where on the road it wanted to be. It darted back and forth between lanes, then into the bushes, before finally deciding that directly in my path was the place to be. Despite my efforts to avoid it, I ended up hitting the badger at about 20 miles per hour. I stopped the car and reversed to engage the reverse lights. The badger was now blocking the road, still alive but in death spasms. Using my keyring torch, I went to investigate. The poor thing was making horrific noises, and I was surprised by its size. More like a Labrador with a spaniel's legs. Realizing I needed to end its suffering, I searched my car for something suitable. I settled on the tire iron from under the boot floor. As I was about to do the deed, another car approached. I flashed my torch to warn them, but as their headlights illuminated me standing over a convulsing badger with a tire iron, they sped away at breakneck speed. I realized how this must have looked to them, some madman murdering animals on country lanes. By the time I processed all of this, the badger was close to the end. I delivered a quick blow to its temple, instantly ending its suffering. With great difficulty, I rolled it to the verge, then slowly walked back to my car to replace the tire iron. The whole experience left me shaken, dealing with the unexpected consequences of a simple drive home and the moral dilemma of having to end an animal's suffering. It was a night I wouldn't soon forget. Story 12. Today, I effed up by allowing both my mother's and my car to be stolen. I live in a normally safe suburb about 20 minutes outside of DC last night. I didn't get out of the office until 8 p.m, already amounting to a 50-hour work week. I went straight to the gym afterwards, finally getting home around 10 p.m, running on fumes. Exhausted, I parked in the driveway, showered, and hopped into bed, not thinking clearly due to fatigue. At 5:30 a.m, my mother woke me, saying the cars were missing. Not car, but cars. I went outside to confirm, and that's when the realization hit me. I'd left my keys in the car. What I didn't know was that my mum kept her service key in my car in case her car fob died. Concluding the cars were stolen, I called the cops and gave them the rundown. Things weren't looking great. My car insurance provider could consider this negligence and deny the claim. I was panicking. During the police report procedure, I recalled my AirPods were in the car. I checked Find My iPhone and saw the headphones pinging in Anacostia, SEDC, not a place you want to be even in daylight, about 45 minutes away. We had a lead, but I had to wait for the police report to be relayed to the different jurisdiction. A determined-sounding detective reached out and I passed on the AirPods location. Around 1:30 p.m, I was notified that my mother's vehicle had been found, but it was crashed and seemingly being prepared for salvage. My car was still missing and the AirPods were no longer pinging. I insisted to the detective that my car might still be in that neighbourhood. 30 minutes later, police found it tucked in an alleyway, seemingly unscathed on the exterior. In disbelief, I took an Uber to recover my car. The interior was littered with ash, smelled like cigarettes and marijuana, and to my shock, contained 3 used condoms in the back seat. I got the cars back but was left wondering if the thieves had an orgy in my car. The final twist: I had only about 30 miles worth of gas in the tank when my car was stolen, but it came back with a full tank. This experience taught me a hard lesson about being more mindful, even when exhausted, and the unexpected consequences that can arise from a simple moment of forgetfulness. Story 13. Today I effed up by ordering a stripper for my 18-year-old friend's birthday. It started out like any other Saturday, but it was Mike's 19th birthday, and I wanted to do something special for him. At 3 p.m, with no gift ready and half the day gone, I had a wild idea. I was now old enough to rent a stripper. Excited, I pitched the idea to 2 close friends who loved it. We even checked with our RA, who confirmed there were no rules against strippers in dorm rooms. We hit up the yellow pages, finding a company that quoted $300 an hour. Too steep for us, so we initially dismissed the idea. But at 6 p.m, they called back, offering $200 for half an hour plus transportation. We rounded up 6 more guys to split the cost 9 ways. As soon as I started talking to the stripper, I realized our mistake. She sounded rough, but without seeing her, we told her to come anyway. When she arrived 45 minutes later, I was shocked. She was a soft 2 out of 10 and 32 years old. During our short walk to the dorm, she shared disturbing personal stories about rape, violence, and her high school kids. Meanwhile, Mike was having a terrible day and wasn't allowed to attend his fraternity's social event, part of our plan to keep him around for the surprise. When the stripper and I entered the room, my friends' faces turned from excitement to horror. Mike sprinted to the sink and threw up, while the stripper had an emotional breakdown and started crying. After 10 minutes of awkward silence, I told her she could leave. Outside, when I brought up a refund, she exploded, threatening rape charges. The company had fired her and wouldn't help. I threatened to call the police, accidentally dialing 911 in the process. Within moments, 4 police officers arrived, hearing shouting about money and rape. They caught the stripper contradicting herself, and my friends came out to explain the situation. The cops found it hilarious that we'd hire a sober stripper and advised us never to order one from the yellow pages. Now I've received 44 calls from the crazy stripper mum, and there might be a civil lawsuit involved. The moral of the story? Just bake your friends a cake for their birthday. Story 14. Today I effed up riding my bike too slow and getting stabbed. Last Friday I was on a solo mountain bike ride heading downhill. Still learning, I was slow on switchbacks, which isn't very stable. Halfway through a turn, for reasons I'm still unsure of, I suddenly found myself on the ground, tangled up with my bike. As I lifted my bike, I realised I was screaming in pain. I discovered a jagged, quarter-sized hole in my right leg, mid-inner thigh. Blood was pouring out, and I knew that's where the femoral artery is. Looking at my bike, I saw the entire brake pedal handle covered in blood and gore. This hole was almost 3 inches deep. Despite my poor insurance, I called 911. The dispatcher tried to help me locate myself and find something to use as a tourniquet. Blood kept streaming as I attempted to tie my calf-length socks together, careful not to roll the wound in the dirt. I must have applied pressure at some point as my gloves were bloody, though I don't remember doing so. 4 minutes into the call, a jogger appeared. I've never been more relieved to see another person. As I looked up to ask her to call 911, I noticed the bleeding had significantly slowed. Relief washed over me, followed by a sudden chill, likely shock setting in. I asked the jogger to go to the trailhead to guide the paramedics. Before my improperly charged phone died, I managed to send my son a screenshot of my location. About 15 minutes after I started bleeding out into the dirt, the paramedics arrived. They patched me up and determined I had no broken bones or head injury. A second set of paramedics arrived with my son, bringing a new off-road gurney that proved very stable during the 1/3 mile trip to the ambulance. At the hospital, the wound would bleed again whenever they unwrapped it. The doctor ordered a contrast dye CAT scan to check my femoral artery or vein. It turned out to be the vein, as the blood was pouring rather than squirting. Thankfully, my vascular system was fine, so they deep cleaned the hole and put in a couple of stitches. The doctor explained it needed to close loosely to allow any bacteria from the break to escape. Throughout the weekend, I worried about reopening the wound, but it seems stable now. My leg feels like someone jammed a roll of quarters into it at a strange angle. Initially, it was dead weight, but this morning I could lift it hands-free, suggesting the muscle damage is temporary. I've examined my bloody bike, trying to understand how this stabbing was even possible, but I can't figure it out. I wonder how long it will take to erase the mental image of all that blood pouring from my leg into the dirt. This experience has been a stark reminder of the risks in mountain biking and the importance of being prepared for emergencies, even on solo rides. Story 15. Today I effed up by eating ice cream in the back of an ambulance. As a firefighter/EMT in an area with frequent high-speed vehicle crashes, we tend to become a bit calloused over time. One hot July day, my captain, a co-worker and I decided to cool off at a local frozen yogurt shop. Just as we received our treats, dispatch called about a high-speed school bus versus pickup truck accident on the highway, the kind of scenario we dread. The kind shop owner urged us to run, insisting our frozen yogurt was on the house. As we rushed to gear up, I was left juggling all 3 bowls of ice cream. In a moment of inspiration, I decided to store them in the ambulance's IV drug refrigerator. Arriving at the scene, we found a school bus full of children and an unrecognizable truck. The young woman driving the truck had been killed on impact, with one of her legs amputated and lying in the middle of the highway. I covered it with a tarp. To make matters worse, the car behind the pickup was driven by the deceased woman's mother, who was understandably hysterical. After comforting the mother until her pastor arrived, I returned to the ambulance. We needed to move it to make room for incoming units, so I hopped in the back to wait for my driver. After a few minutes, I thought about the ice cream melting in the fridge and decided to indulge. There I was, shoveling spoonfuls of chocolate frozen yogurt into my mouth, when the ambulance door swung open. 15 kids, 4 cops, my boss, and the distraught mother all stared at me in disbelief. The gravity of the situation hit me immediately. A bus full of potentially injured children, a deceased victim, her grieving mother, and there I was, eating ice cream like a careless glutton. I tried to recover, awkwardly tossing the ice cream aside and blurting out something about giving the kids a ride. But their disapproving astonishment was clear, and that's how I earned the nickname Ice Cream, a reminder of the importance of maintaining professionalism and empathy, even in the most challenging situations. Story 16. Today I effed up by playing an April Fool's joke on my in-laws and having them call the police. My wife and I have a great relationship with my in-laws, who all share an excellent sense of humour. One March 31st, while my in-laws were out of town, we stopped by their house to check on their dogs. As they were due back the following day, we started brainstorming ideas for an April Fool's prank. After considering some classic jokes, my wife had a stroke of genius inspired by the then popular website awkwardfamilyphotos.com. Being a graphic designer, she easily printed out 25 ridiculous photos in various sizes. We replaced every picture frame on the first floor and the 4 large ones in their bedroom with these hilarious, awkward images. Pleased with our handiwork, we headed home only to receive a call from her parents saying they were returning early due to bad weather. We weren't concerned, thinking it would still be a great gag. Hours later, my wife's phone rang again. It was her mother, frantically yelling about someone breaking in and mentioning pictures everywhere. It was still March 31st, and the possibility of an April Fool's joke hadn't crossed their minds. My wife, overcome with laughter, couldn't even respond. When she handed me the phone, I realized my father-in-law was giving their address to 911 in the background. Panicking, I started yelling that it was an April Fool's joke and that we were responsible. My in-laws were initially shocked, but eventually found the humor in the situation. The incident became even more legendary when my sister-in-law's boyfriend, a detective, called the local police department to inquire about the 911 call. The officer's response? "Oh, you mean the house with the killer clown pics?" We later learned that my father-in-law had recently watched a special about John Wayne Gacy, the infamous killer clown serial killer. When he saw the clown pictures in their bedroom, he told his wife to get out of the house, believing someone was there to kill them. Although we never intended to genuinely scare my in-laws, just prank them, it remains the best April Fool's joke we've ever pulled off. The story has become a cherished family anecdote, showcasing both our creativity and the strong, humorous bond we share with my in-laws. Story 17. Today, I effed up by nearly destroying a multi-million-dollar water treatment facility. It happened so recently that I'm still soaking wet as I type this. Yesterday, I received a mere hour of training on how to operate and maintain a groundwater treatment facility. The engineer who designed, built, and operated it had quit without notice, and my company was scrambling to find a replacement. I volunteered, eager to impress as a new employee. Today was my first day working solo, and despite feeling in over my head, I decided to just roll with it. The day started simply enough, checking hundreds of gauges and connections for correct pressure. One seemed particularly high, so I called up the chain. They recommended backwashing the carbon filters, a process I didn't know how to do. But in my eagerness to prove my worth, I assured them I was on it. I closed valves, flipped switches, and approached the carbon tanks. It seemed simple. Disconnect hoses going one way, reattach them the opposite way for backward flow. I disconnected the first hose and chaos erupted. It exploded off the tank, spraying everywhere like an untended fire hose. I was instantly drenched in contaminated, untreated, carcinogenic, chemical-filled water. Shock paralyzed me momentarily. I tried to reattach the hose, but the water pressure was too high. I ran around closing valves, which only seemed to make things worse. Warning lights began flashing in every colour, sirens blared, and water pooled on the floor. The metal hose thrashed about, striking delicate equipment. Finally, after frantic valve turning, the water stopped. I reattached the hose, but found myself standing in a foot of water, surrounded by screaming sirens and blinding warning lights. I spent the rest of the day troubleshooting every light and siren, and using a shop vac to clean up the water. I got everything back to normal, except for a few broken items. When my boss called to ask how the day went, I lied and said it was fine. I didn't know about the remote monitoring system that had recorded everything. Now I'm facing a Monday meeting with my boss, concerned I might lose my job for lying about the incident. This experience has been a harsh lesson in the importance of honesty, proper training, and the dangers of overconfidence in unfamiliar situations. Story 18. Today I effed up by accidentally helping someone commit theft in full police uniform. A little while ago, I responded to a call about a lady in the park pushing a trolley full of pot plants around. The dispatcher informed me that she was shouting, acting drunk, and scaring children. Concerned mothers had called the police. Upon arriving at the park, I quickly located the woman. She was indeed heavily intoxicated and pushing a trolley full of potted plants, ordinary foliage, not marijuana, up from the park. After talking with her and getting her details, I discovered she lived only 200 meters up the road. Thinking I could resolve this situation peacefully and prevent any further disturbance, I decided to help her push the rather heavy trolley home. As we walked, I chatted with her, enjoying the opportunity to meet someone new. When we reached her house, I even helped her unload the numerous potted plants onto her wooden deck on the second floor. Feeling satisfied with my work, I thanked her, returned to my patrol car, and informed the dispatcher that the job had been resolved without needing further police action. As I drove away, I felt a sense of pride wash over me. I had found an alternative solution to the usual approach of arresting someone for disorderly behaviour. However, my satisfaction was short-lived. Just down the road, a bystander waved me down. Thinking I was about to receive another job, I stopped. To my horror, the person told me a drunken lady came along with her shopping trolley and stole all my potted plants. In that moment, the realization hit me. I had unknowingly assisted in a theft. My well-intentioned act of kindness had backfired spectacularly. What I thought was a job well done turned out to be an embarrassing mistake, reminding me that even with the best intentions, things can go terribly wrong in police work. This experience served as a humbling reminder to always verify situations thoroughly, no matter how straightforward they may seem. It's a story that still makes me cringe, but also one that taught me a valuable lesson about the unpredictable nature of law enforcement. Story 19. Today I effed up by telling a stranger I can't wait to fuck them tonight. I was at a work party, fully embracing the opportunity to get sloshed. My girlfriend at the time, not my current wife, had kindly offered to pick me up and drive me home, knowing I'd be in no state to drive myself. On our way home, I asked her to stop at a gas station so I could buy cigarettes. She pulled her light blue Jeep into the parking lot, and I stumbled out to make my purchase. Mission accomplished, I returned to the parking lot, ready to head home. In my inebriated state, I over-aggressively yanked open the passenger door of a blue Jeep, plopped myself down, and declared to my girlfriend, "I can't wait to get home and fuck the shit out of you." What happened next was not at all what I expected. Suddenly, I was hit in the face, accompanied by the loudest screaming I'd ever heard. Instinctively, I covered my face, bewildered as to what I'd said wrong. The screaming was intense and scared. making it hard to understand what was being yelled. It wasn't until the third or fourth punch that I clearly heard, "You fucking rapist, get the fuck out of my car." In that moment, I experienced instant sobriety. I uncovered my face and looked up, finally realizing that although I was indeed in a blue Jeep, it wasn't my girlfriend's blue Jeep. Her identical vehicle was parked next to and blocked by this random woman's blue Jeep. I tumbled out of the stranger's car and made my way to my girlfriend's vehicle, explaining the mix-up. My girlfriend, bless her, managed to convince the understandably terrified woman not to call the police about some crazy guy breaking into her car and threatening to have sex with her. Needless to say, I did not engage in any amorous activities that night. This embarrassing incident served as a stark reminder of the importance of sobriety and attention to detail, even in seemingly simple situations like getting into a car. It's a story that still makes me cringe, but also one that I'm thankful didn't escalate further than it did. Story 20. Today I effed up by losing my virginity to a water slide. I finally reached a point where I can share this gem about my first experience with one of those water slides that suddenly drop you straight down before the actual slide begins. If you're unfamiliar, I suggest looking them up on YouTube. There's nothing quite like them. At the time, my girlfriend, now fiancée, worked as a photographer at a resort with indoor and outdoor water parks. One of her perks was free entry for herself and a guest. So on a hot summer day, we decided to cool off there. While exploring, I discovered what looked like their most thrilling water slide. It drops you a whopping 90 feet straight down before the actual slide begins. Being a thrill seeker, I had to try it. I made the long climb to the top, waited in line, and finally, it was my turn. As I entered the tube, the operator instructed me to keep my legs crossed. Being a big, heavy guy, I found this uncomfortable and ignored the advice. There I stood, having a panic attack from anticipation, legs uncrossed. The operator pressed the button, the bottom opened, and down I went. Very quickly, I realized why they insist on crossed legs. Water shot up my backside so fast and forcefully, I swear I tasted it in my mouth. As I raced down the slide, I questioned every life choice I'd ever made. Reaching the bottom, I sat there for a moment, feeling utterly violated, like someone from an episode of Law and Order, Special Victims Unit. When I finally stood up, I felt a warm stream of water mixed with, well, let's just say it wasn't pleasant. Shoot out of me faster than Old Faithful. I quickly ran to the bathroom, leaving an unfortunate trail behind me as the slide operator stared in disbelief. They had to shut down the slide for the rest of the day. On the bright side, my insides had never been cleaner. The moral of this embarrassing tale: always keep your legs crossed on water slides. It's a lesson I learned the hard way, but one I'll never forget. While it's mortifying to recall, at least now I can laugh about it, and hopefully others can learn from my mistake without experiencing it firsthand.